The first thing I want to ask is, how did the Vatican Commandos reunion go?
The Vatican Commandos reunion was amazing, because the Vatican Commandos was my hardcore punk band in '81 and '82. We broke up, or rather I left the band in '83, and I think they broke up in '85. So and it was all facilitated, I'm sad to say, by Facebook. So what happened in the last 5 years is all the original members and I had become Facebook friends. And then this club we used to hang out at in Norwalk, Connecticut called the Anthrax, someone was putting out a book about the Anthrax, and the guy who put the book out asked us if we'd be interested in reforming for a book party. And we were like, yeah, sure. And it was so nice. So we all met up, and like the singer who in 1982 had a big blue mohawk and did a lot of acid, he's now a neuroscientist.
Really?
And he has his own neurosurgery hospital. The bass player has a big multimedia company and he lives on a ranch in New Mexico. The drummer has a publishing company. So we all met up in New York and like went out to dinner and rehearsed and played our show. And my high school girlfriend was in the front row of the show with her husband. And it was just like the whole thing was so nice, and it sounded so much better than any of us thought it would.
Wow.
Like it wasn't middle-aged guys tragically trying to like reclaim their youth and play fast punk rock. Like it actually sounded good. Yeah. Very surprised. So it was really nice. I hope that we can like on a yearly basis meet up and do it again.
You know, it's fascinating. You think back to where you were in '81, '82, '83, all of you guys, and you fast forward 30 years.
Yep.
And you all done pretty good for yourselves.
We all have done fairly well for ourselves in strange ways. There was one member of the band who wasn't really that involved in the reunion because he unfortunately has gone down the path of crystal meth addiction.
Ooh.
And you realize that crystal meth takes people to very bad places. Because like everybody else in the band, like we're all like pretty healthy, relatively successful, everyone's looking fairly good. Our friend who unfortunately has been ravaged by crystal meth looks like he's 90 years old and lives in a trailer park. So that's the only, like, that's the lesson there is ideally in a perfect world, people should probably resist the urge to become addicted to crystal meth.
Right.
Yeah.
Vatican Commandos were one of the very first bands I sought out when I discovered Napster. Mm-hmm. And I managed to find a couple of tracks.
Oh, really?
Sorry, but I did.
Awesome. That's great.
And I still have them in my iPod. So you know, if you do this on a yearly basis, I may have to come down and watch.
It was, and then we did another reunion show in Los Angeles. Because I was like, well, why not? And it was really cute because it was, I mean, maybe cute's the wrong word, but like guys in their mid-40s playing hardcore punk on stage, and then the audience was in their 40s and they were slam dancing and moshing, and it was really like sweet and endearing.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we even wrote a new song called Nazi Pope. Okay. And it was 4 seconds long, and we played it 20 times during the course of the night. I can't, it involves a dirty word, but it was like, Nazi Pope, Nazi Pope, Nazi Pope, blah, blah. That's the whole song. So whenever anyone in the audience yelled out, Nazi Pope, we'd have to be like, okay, Nazi Pope, Nazi Pope, Nazi Pope, ma, ma. I can't say what the last two words are.
This is the internet, you can say whatever you want.
Oh, so it's Nazi Pope, fuck off.
Okay.
So it was Nazi Pope, Nazi Pope, Nazi Pope, fuck off 20 times in one night.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that you've moved west.
I have moved west.
And you know, you had your little closet in New York for all those years.
I still have my closet.
Yeah. And then didn't you have a penthouse at some point in a country home?
Well, to put it in context, I grew up really, really poor. And my mom and I were on food stamps and welfare when I was growing up. And I never expected to have a career as a musician. I never expected to have any success. So at some point, I guess like 10 years ago, I had some success, and I thought, you know what? I'm gonna go have a fancy house. And so I bought this fancy apartment on the Upper West Side of New York. It was a quintuplex in a beautiful old building, and my neighbors were Bono and Alec Baldwin. Very fancy, and I moved in, and I thought, okay, like now, like the poor kid has made good. He's got his fancy apartment, and I moved in, and realized I was incredibly lonely and didn't know anyone in my neighborhood, and so I sold it and moved back downtown. So it was like, I thought of the apartment as sort of like my Jay Gatsby apartment.
Okay.
You know, like serious overcompensation. You know,
But then you had a country home too, didn't you?
then I had this crazy degenerate house up in the woods in New York State where we had a disco in the house and a spa in the house, and you could sleep about 30 people there. And I stopped drinking a few years ago, but before I stopped drinking, this house in upstate New York was just like a degenerate party palace.
With the disco.
With a disco. We turned the garage into a disco, and it was amazing. Like getting 30 or 40 people out of New York City to come up into the woods for the weekend to just like drink and get into all sorts of trouble. So a lot of relationships began and ended in this crazy country house. Yeah.
So that house is gone too? It's out of the portfolio?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's out of the portfolio.
Yeah.
Nothing says rock and roll like discussing a real estate portfolio, right?
So now you have this place in LA, which is an old castle or something?
It was a castle built in 1927, and it is amazing. One of the things I like about Los Angeles is a lot of people have this idea of LA being like bleached blonde hair and plastic surgery, and that's such a small part of LA life. LA is weird. Like it has such a like crumbling strangeness to it, and there's so many artists there and so many writers and so many musicians, and it's on the east side, you know, like Los Feliz, Silver Lake, Echo Park, East Hollywood. That's where I live, and it's the house I live in was built in the 20s by a rich movie producer in the 20s, and everybody over time has lived there. Like the Beatles lived there for a while, the Rolling Stones lived there when they were making Cocksucker Blues, Marlon Brando lived there. So it's one of these weird, old, storied LA houses.
Wow. Was it in any condition to live in when you bought it?
When I bought it in true showbiz fashion, it was falling apart but had nice wallpaper. You know, like, I mean, it was crumbling. We had to replace the roof, the windows, the walls, the electrical, the plumbing, everything had to get replaced, but it had like some fancy chandeliers and some fancy wallpaper. But it's really like, it looks like a beautiful country house in Normandy. It's just in the middle of Los Angeles.
And a nice big lot?
It's pretty big, yeah. And it's surrounded by state park. So it's like a weird country house in the middle of the city.
Can you sleep there?
Strangely enough, yes.
Okay.
It's very dark up where I am. It's very quiet. And it's one of the few places where I actually have had a good night's sleep.
Okay, which brings us to the album, Destroyed, sure. Which is, okay, I just came back from abroad, and my sleeping schedules have been just completely messed up. Mm-hmm. So rather than lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, I've been getting up and doing work at my office at home. And one of the things I did one morning at about 3:30 when everybody was still asleep is I put on Destroyed. And I was absolute, when I started reading about the provenance of the album and how it was written and where it was written, listening to it at 3:30 in the morning when everybody else is dead to the world made all the sense in the world.
Amen. I mean, that's when it was conceived of. That's when most of the music was written. And part of the idea of the record is to, on one hand, reflect the strangeness of being awake with insomnia at 3:30 in the morning, but also to reflect the strange sense of comfort that comes from being awake at 3:30 in the morning. You know, that like on one hand, like everyone wants to be asleep at 3:30. You know, like I'm sure that when you had your insomnia, you desperately wanted to be asleep. But once you accept the fact that you're not sleeping, like being awake when it's dark and everyone else in the world is asleep can actually feel kind of nice.
Well, it can, because it feels like you have the whole world to yourself.
Yep.
And nobody's going to bother you, and it's just peaceful, and I can think.
And then the sun comes up and people wake up and the world is compromised.
By sunrise.
Like I've had that experience so many times of like the sun comes up, a city comes to life, and I feel sort of disappointed. Like the world was so much more calm and peaceful when it was just me as the only person awake.
Yeah, when you start hearing the freeway buzz and maybe the people start leaving for work and you can hear the cars ripping down the streets, then solitude is broken.
That's when it's time to go in the basement, open up the coffin, lie down, go back to sleep. Yeah.
So you wrote a lot of these in hotel rooms, I guess obviously as you were touring or jetting around the world doing something, right? Were there any cities or any hotel rooms, hotel chains that were more conducive to writing than others?
You know, a lot of it is based on how comfortable I am being awake at 4 o'clock in the morning. Because like in the past, when I was a degenerate touring musician, being awake at 4 in the morning meant partying, you know, nightclubs and after hours and all that sort of thing. And now it just means me in my hotel room, not sleeping. For some reason, and you know how like in Inuit culture, they have different words to describe different types of snow. You know, like we just have that one word, there's snow. And I guess in Inuit culture, they have like 20 different words to describe like packed snow, light snow, granular snow. As a connoisseur of insomnia, I almost feel like I should have that same sort of like lexicon to describe the different types of insomnia. And what I found is that European insomnia is the most conducive for creativity.
Okay, what is European insomnia?
When I can't sleep in Europe, for some reason I get a lot done. When I have insomnia in the Far East, I'm just so disconcerted and discomfited by the whole thing.
Well, you would probably be in Hong Kong or Tokyo
Yeah.
or Bangkok or something, and you look out a window at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's as bright as day.
Yeah, and it's just I guess it's maybe because European culture, like I can relax into it, and also like most European cities at 3 o'clock in the morning are completely asleep, and they're so still and they're so quiet. Whereas like, yeah, you're in Hong Kong at 3 o'clock in the morning, and a lot of people are sleeping, but the city still has this weird energy to it, and I find it hard to write in environments like that.
And when you're in a Hong Kong or a Tokyo, you're usually in a super tall high-rise, and you feel this weird hermetically sealedness from everything. Yet it's like watching something on TV almost.
And it's a word, or it's a class of words that's missing from the English language when you have two states of being at the same time.
Okay.
Like one word that I really want someone to invent is a word that means pride and shame in equal measure. Meaning like, okay, I'm trying to think of an example that's not offensive. Okay, mildly offensive. Suppose you're in traffic and some guy's trying to get past you and you move in front of him. And on one hand, you're kind of proud because like you kept him from getting in front of you, but you're also ashamed because you're like, oh, I'm a jerk. Like I just cut off this guy and I'm a jerk, but you're a little bit proud at the same time. That same way of like being in a hotel room in Hong Kong, sitting on like the 80th floor, there's like on one hand it's really strange and you're in this hermetically sealed environment and it freaks you out, but there's a weird comfort to it as well. It's almost like Stockholm syndrome.
Right, because you're removed from it.
Yeah, like and you're like, oh, I hate that I'm in this weird alien environment, but there's a strange comfort to it as well.
I'm sure the Germans have a word for it. Germans have a word for everything.
Okay,
If not,
well,
they'll
it's like,
invent one.
Yeah, it's like Scheichenflausenbruten.
Sure.
Like and I like the Germanic way of making words is like, well, if we're trying to describe a subway in New York, but in Brooklyn that goes above ground, their word would be like New York subway, Brooklyn above ground, all is one word.
Yeah, you just keep adding syllables, one after another after another. Yeah. So The Day was written in a hotel room in Spain.
Yeah.
Now, before you see the video, it is one of the most achingly melancholy songs.
Really?
Wow. Well,
Okay.
that's. I think it is. I mean, it was just like it's in a major key, but boy, it kind of makes me. I don't know, something. Two different, states of being. And then you see the video with Heather Graham as this angel, and it's like, oh my! And the woman lying in the hospital bed, it's like, oh God! It just tears at you. It's. I think it's really cool. I mean, you don't see a lot of people doing videos like that anymore.
Well, we were just having lunch, and I just don't see a lot of videos anymore.
No.
So I don't know what anyone else is doing. And I think I had this idea a few years ago that, like life is short, and why not, as a musician, why not just try to make music that you really love? And if in the process you make something that's overly vulnerable, or if in the process you make something that doesn't sell or that doesn't get played on the radio, that's fine, because if your goal is really trying to make music that you love, even if no one else buys it or likes it, you've still succeeded. Just having, not that there's right and wrong intentions, but for me at least having healthier, sort of more honorable intentions, and not trying to second guess a marketplace, and not trying to second guess a journalist on Pitchfork, you know, and not trying to think like, okay, how can I look good in the video, or how can I make a cool video, or how can I make a video that will compel people to buy the record, but instead, how do you make something that you think is interesting and beautiful?
So just art. Screw everything, this is art.
You try, and it doesn't, I mean, like, even if you have the best intentions, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to succeed. It doesn't mean that you're going to end up making good art, but at least if that's your goal, it increases the chances that you'll end up with something good.
Well, you have a lot of people already discussing the symbolism and the mythologies and whatever else is in the video, good versus evil, death versus life, and everything else that's going on. So I guess that's an example of good art. People are having multiple interpretations of a statement that you've made.
And that's one of my favorite things about music and music video and photography is they're short form pieces of work, and so they can have a lot of ambiguity. You know, if you make a 90-minute film that's unresolved and ambiguous, no one will watch it, because it's 90 minutes of their life without a resolution. It drives people crazy. Like I saw that with the last David Lynch movie, Inland Empire.
Yeah, that was a little annoying, wasn't it?
See, I loved it.
You did?
Yeah, it's my favorite of all his movies. Because it's so unresolved and weird and ambiguous, but it's 3 hours long.
Yeah.
So people give up 3 hours of their life to immerse themselves in this ambiguous, unresolved world, and that's a huge time commitment. Whereas if we play a video for someone, it's 3.5 minutes. And people are so much more comfortable with that being like an experimental art form. And the same thing with music, like the music on this album, I think it's very open to interpretation with a lot of ambiguity. And people are more accepting of that if they only are giving up a few minutes of their time.
And you only sing on a couple of songs.
Yeah, I wish that wasn't the case. And if I had a perfect, beautiful voice, I would sing all the time. You know, if I were David Bowie, if I were Bono, if I were Teddy Pendergrass, Chris Cornell, I'm just thinking like people with amazing voices, then I would sing constantly. But my voice is really limited, and it only works on a couple of songs.
In a certain register, in a certain...
Yeah.
So
it doesn't go too low, it doesn't go too high, it's just sort of like this middle-of-the-road, inbred white guy voice, you know. And if I try and get too soulful or too powerful, it just falls apart.
So you bring in the women.
Yeah.
Now, what, 3, 4 different female vocalists?
On this record, 3, 4, I don't know, 3.
Okay. Where did you find these people? And these are real performers, these aren't samples, these are...
No, these are real singers. Basically just either recommendations. My friend E. Yang, who sings on 3 of the songs on the album, she is interesting because she's this very tall African-American woman, but she grew up in the punk rock world. You know, so her background is like DRI and the Dead Kennedys. And then she was working at Carnegie Hall, and I think I met her at Carnegie Hall. And so the irony being, her background is like classical music and punk rock, and I asked her to come in and sing more sort of like soulful, gospel-inspired stuff, which she wasn't that familiar with. So the irony, of course, being inbred, middle-aged, scrawny white guy exposing tall, beautiful African-American woman to gospel music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a bit... Okay.
ExploreMusic wears English Laundry apparel.